I've been playing Clubhouse Games for the past couple of weeks. Initially, I thought I wouldn't like it. Digital versions of tabletop games weren't something I was really in the market for, considering I have a good selection of them at home. I've been playing many of these games for most of my life, so I wasn't super excited about having them on the Switch, at least not until I spent some real time with them. If you haven't heard of Clubhouse Games, it's Nintendo's latest first-party effort on the Switch, a collection of 51 games, or 52 if you include the piano, that are modeled after classic card and board games such as checkers, chess, and even much older games like Nine Men's Morris, along with Nintendo's spin on more recent classics like Uno, Connect 4, and Yahtzee, which are all well-built and fun to play. There are a few games that are a little more novel too, such as Tanks, Six Ball Puzzler, and Shooting Gallery. Tanks and Shooting Gallery share roots in Wii Play, though the version of Tanks in Clubhouse Games more closely resembles Super Mario Party's tank shooting minigame, and Six Ball Puzzler is also a minigame taken from the Mario Party series. If traditional stuff isn't your speed, there are a few games that are more like takes on toys rather than established board games, like slot cars, toy baseball, tennis, soccer, and, of course, tanks. These are more action-focused and are good for quick bursts. Overall, I'd say these games are good, but they weren't standouts in the collection for me. But the more I played, the more these digital incarnations of time-honored classics grew on me. I found Clubhouse becoming one of my most played games over the time I had to prepare this review despite its relative simplicity. That is, as long as I played the game the right way. I say there's a right way because it seems clear after spending a lot of time playing the game in various modes that there's actually a wrong way to play it. And the wrong way is essentially any setting in which more than two people are trying to play. Setting that aside for a moment, let's talk about the right way to play Clubhouse Games. It's clearly designed for you to play it on a tabletop. No dock, no controllers save for a single Joy-Con for each player. And when I say tabletop, I don't mean the traditional Switch tabletop mode that uses the full-size model's built-in kickstand. Instead, I'm talking about laying your Switch down on a flat surface, much like you would a traditional game board. But, as I mentioned before, to get the most out of this experience, you'll need to limit this to just 2 players. Any more than that, and Clubhouse severely limits your available game choices. With 2 players, though, Clubhouse Games is loads of fun. You can't play every game in the set, but most of them are available. While card games are mostly disabled since you need more than one screen to prevent other players from viewing your hand, most everything else is fair game. Regardless of whether you're playing in my right or wrong way, Clubhouse offers up various types of games from all over the world. So, how do they hold up? In short, very, very well. All of these games are realized with an incredible amount of care. Nintendo has gone to great lengths to ensure that all of the 51 games in Clubhouse are accessible, simple, and fun to play. Each game starts off with a fully voiced introduction to help you get up to speed, and they can be pretty funny at times.
I'm a January man. Pines and cranes are very in now.
Ew. Give me February's plum blossoms and nightingales any day.
And if that isn't enough, you can flip through a more traditional tutorial before each game that'll give you the full details and rules. For games that I didn't understand how to play before, like Hanafuda, this was really helpful. Some of the more complex games even include an assist mode, which will show you what moves you have at your disposal, and if you completely mess up a move, many of the included games have an undo move button, which is really useful but might just make your opponent upset with you. Visually, none of the games fail to impress. 4 in a row, the Connect 4 style game looks almost photorealistic. There are small details in each of the games that makes them feel as though you're playing the real thing, like a coffee cup near the slot racing track, or entire rooms modeled behind the game boards, or even perspective changes depending on if you're playing in docked mode or tabletop mode. My personal favorite is darts, and it's one of the few games that are best played in TV mode. You hold the Joy-Con like you would the real thing, hold a button, and pantomime tossing it at the screen to throw a dart. Playing it felt like I was back in 2006 and playing Wii Sports for the first time. Speaking of Wii Sports, bowling also makes its return in Clubhouse Games, albeit in a different form. You can still use motion controls to roll your ball down the lanes, but it just feels a bit off compared to what I'm used to from years of the Wii version. Perhaps owing to the slightly touchier motion controls and the fact that you no longer have to time the ball's release as it's handled automatically. It also lacks some of the cute touches, such as how you can't throw your ball behind you or into adjacent lanes any longer. And rather than a Mii or some type of avatar on screen, you just directly control the ball itself. Although rolling that ball is incredibly satisfying. The Switch's HD Rumble is a feature that's been all but forgotten, but it's implemented really well in Clubhouse Games. Feeling a bowling ball rolling down the lane or dice tumbling in a cup and yacht dice feels eerily close to the real deal. It reminds me of how great this tech can be if used properly. If you choose to play in single player, you'll have the option to play games with different guides, which you can find scattered all over the globe. Each game guide will select a handful of the 51 available games that fit a specific theme, like Nintendo's history, which includes Hanafuda, a nod to the company's history as a card game manufacturer. One of my favorite things about Hanafuda and Clubhouse Games is the fact that you can unlock a Mario-themed deck of cards, and the deck is actually an old Japanese Club Nintendo set from 2007, which is just a really cool detail that nobody but Nintendo would put in a game. Beyond neat collections of games to play, there was little to keep me interested in playing Clubhouse Games by myself. This just isn't a game that's at its best when played solo. Single player is the only game mode that gives you access to all 51 games, which seems out of place in a game that's so much better when played with others. In games that require more than one player, the game will add in CPU opponents for you to face off against, which leaves me wondering, why are 3 and 4 player modes so limited in what games you can play when in certain modes CPU opponents will act as substitutes for human players? Games like Chinese checkers can traditionally be played by 4 or more players, but in Clubhouse Games they're limited to just 3. Conversely, games like darts, bowling, and golf should be able to support up to 4, but don't. It's hard to understand why these limitations are in place. If you're planning on playing Clubhouse Games in groups of 3 or 4, you should be prepared to run into some strange and sometimes frustrating limitations. For example, if you're playing with 4 players on one console, you can play just 2 of the 51 available games. Scale that down to 3 players and you're able to play 3 games. If you play online or locally with multiple consoles with 4 players, you can access 8 games. And if you do the same with 3, you can access 9 games. If everyone does bring a Switch to play, at least you'll only need 1 copy of the game. That's because Nintendo is releasing a free app that lets you participate in local multiplayer, provided at least one of the players involved owns the full version, sort of like the DS's Download Play service. Unfortunately, the feature does not work online, but since it isn't actually available yet, I haven't been able to test it, but I'll put up a short video about it once it's on the eShop. Another really cool thing you can do with 4 consoles is to play Mosaic Mode. If you haven't seen our video on it, Mosaic Mode is a mode in which you line up any number of Switch consoles up to 4 and draw a line between them to make a larger playing field for supported games. I liked setting this up, and it's a really cool technical demonstration, but to me it's only made a real difference in Team Tanks. Playing tanks and seeing shots travel across multiple Switch screens is really cool, but in games like fishing and slot racing, Mosaic Mode feels like little more than a cool party trick. Overall, Mosaic Mode performs really well, but I did notice some lag when transitioning between consoles in slot racing. When my car would travel between 2 consoles, I could see the on-screen image stutter. It wasn't enough to make the game unplayable, but it did take away from the feeling that Nintendo had pulled off some kind of arcane wizardry. I invited a group of friends over to test the game with me, unaware of these limitations, and I was surprised by how few games were made available for us to play. To me, Clubhouse Games seemed like a casual party game, the type of game you would put on in social gatherings to get friends, specifically the type that might not be into video games, to play with you. Instead, we ended up playing Super Mario Party so we wouldn't have to leave anybody out. The situation isn't any different online. You'll still be limited to the same handful of games if you go beyond 2 players, but there is one key difference between the game's 2 online modes. If you choose to play with anyone, you'll select up to 3 games that you want to play and wait to be matched up with online players. If you play with friends, the player who created the lobby controls everything, including which games are played. Oddly enough, however, nobody can choose to leave a game once it's started, even the host. Meaning if you pick up a game like, say, Ludo, which can take a long time to play all the way through, you can't quit out of it without going to your home screen and closing the game. Weird. Perhaps the strangest quirk is how Clubhouse Games handles disconnecting online players. If a player in a Play With Anyone game disconnects during the game, a CPU opponent will seamlessly take their place, which is great. But if you're playing with friends, the entire game gets shut down instead. Not cool. No matter how you look at it, this is a bit insane. For a game that appears to be designed to be played with others, limiting the available games to such a ludicrous degree left me shaking my head. Why can't we play bowling or golf with more than 2 players? To say nothing of the other turn-based games that are part of Clubhouse's roster. I've spent hours playing all of Clubhouse Games' 51 offerings, and with a few exceptions, they were enjoyable. If the 2-player experience scaled across differing player counts, I'd recommend it to anybody with a Switch, hands down. However, given how limited the game selection becomes when playing with more than one other person, online or off, I highly recommend you consider how you're going to play Clubhouse Games before you pick it up. If you plan on playing by yourself or in small groups, then this may be the game for you. But if, like me, you wanted this to become a mainstay of your social gathering library, I'd hold off and hope Nintendo releases an update to make more games available in more scenarios. That said, I like Clubhouse Games. When I played it the right way, I enjoyed the hell out of it. Playing with a friend is almost always incredibly entertaining, and none of the games, even the ones I don't particularly love, slowed my enjoyment. When I played it the wrong way, I found it hard to continue, which is a shame because it could have been the perfect game if it would just receive a few minor tweaks. That about wraps up my review of Clubhouse Games for the Nintendo Switch. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to GameXplain for much more on Clubhouse Games and all other things gaming as well. Ring that notification bell to be the first to know every time a new video goes up, and I'll see you next time.